If you want, I can also give you 5 more punchy variations so you can choose the one with the strongest pull for your audience. The second you go silent, everything changes. Most people think relationships are built by saying the right things, keeping the conversation going, and constantly showing up to prove you care. But when you're dealing with an avoidant, that approach often does the opposite of what you want. Avoidants are wired to value space, independence, and emotional safety above all else. The more you push, the more they pull away. The more you try to get them to open up, the more they close themselves off. It's not because they don't care. It's because closeness feels risky for them. That's why silence can be so powerful. It interrupts the cycle of pursuit and withdrawal that's been running in your relationship. When you go silent, not as a punishment, but as a conscious choice, you create space for the avoidant to feel safe again. You're removing the pressure. And here's the thing, when the pressure is gone, curiosity comes back. Avoidants don't start to miss you when you keep talking. They miss you when there's suddenly nothing to react to. That silence makes them wonder where you are, what you're thinking, and why you're not chasing them anymore. It shifts the balance of power without games or manipulation, because you're not pretending. You're simply focusing your energy back on yourself instead of pouring it into someone who isn't meeting you halfway. This is where everything changes. In that silence, you begin to rediscover your own voice. You stop waiting for their approval or attention to feel good about yourself. You remember that your worth doesn't depend on their response. And ironically, that's often when they start reaching out because they can sense the shift. You're no longer pulling on the rope. You've dropped it. That's the moment avoidants feel safe enough to step forward. Silence isn't about giving up or shutting down emotionally. It's about creating a pause. A pause that lets both of you breathe, reflect, and decide if this connection is truly right for you. And if the avoidant never comes back, that silence still works in your favor because it protects you from wasting more energy on someone unwilling to meet you where you are. The second you go silent, everything changes because silence forces the avoidant to confront the reality of losing you. It makes them realize you won't carry the relationship alone. It also forces you to confront the truth about whether they're capable of showing up for you. In that way, silence becomes not just a communication strategy, but a filter, a way to separate people who value you from the people who only value the comfort of your presence. And that right there is where your real power lies. If you want, I can now rewrite this into an Mel Robbins 20-second punchy opening, so it feels like she's saying it live on stage. That would make it hit even harder. Why walking away speaks louder than words. In relationships, especially with someone who has avoidant tendencies, most people believe that explaining yourself, talking it out, or pleading for understanding is the path to connection. But with avoidance, words can often feel like pressure, and pressure is the very thing they run from. Every text you send, every late-night phone call, every attempt to fix things with explanations, these can push them further into their shell. Walking away, on the other hand, delivers a message so clear, so undeniable that it bypasses all their defenses. It's a statement without words. I respect myself enough not to stay where I'm not valued. When you walk away, you shift the dynamic instantly. The avoidant, used to you filling every silence and bridging every gap, is suddenly left without that constant presence. That space does something powerful. It allows them to feel the weight of your absence. They might not respond immediately. They might even pretend they're fine. But deep down, the shift has been felt. Your absence forces them to confront the reality that you were never obligated to stay. It shows that your presence was a choice. And now, you're making a different choice. Walking away is not about manipulation. It's not about making the other person chase you just so you can feel desired again. It's about reclaiming your energy, your dignity, and your peace. It's about recognizing that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to step back from someone who can't or won't meet you halfway. Words can be debated, dismissed, or misunderstood. Actions, however, are undeniable. Walking away is the ultimate action. It's the clearest boundary you can set because it's rooted in behavior, not in theory. For the avoidant, this boundary can be a wake-up call. They often don't realize the depth of their emotional distance until the person who loved them is no longer there to bridge it. In that quiet space you leave behind, they may finally reflect on their own patterns and what your presence truly meant. And if they decide to come back, it's not because you demanded it, it's because they've recognized the gap you once filled. For you, walking away is equally transformative. It reinforces the truth that your worth is not defined by someone's willingness to hold on to you. It proves to yourself that you can choose peace over chaos, clarity over confusion. It gives you the freedom to invest your time and energy into people who meet you with the same effort and openness you give. In the end, walking away speaks louder than words because it doesn't just tell someone how you feel, it shows them. And in showing them, you protect your heart, reclaim your power, and open the door to relationships where you are seen, valued, and respected without having to fight for it. That's a message no amount of talking could ever deliver as clearly. Silence isn't weakness, it's your secret weapon. In a world that constantly tells us to speak up, explain ourselves, and keep the conversation going, it can feel counterintuitive to step back and say nothing. But in relationships, especially with avoidant partners, silence can communicate more than any carefully chosen words ever could. Avoidants often feel overwhelmed by emotional intensity and closeness, so the more you try to convince them, the more they retreat. They interpret constant communication as pressure, and pressure triggers their instinct to pull away. Silence flips that dynamic entirely. It removes the chase, takes away the noise, and allows space for the avoidant to feel safe enough to move toward you on their own terms. Choosing silence is not about playing games or punishing someone. It's about controlling the one thing you truly can, your own energy. Instead of pouring your emotions into endless messages or conversations that go nowhere, you redirect that energy into yourself. This isn't weakness. Weakness is begging for someone's attention when they've shown you they're not ready or willing to give it. Strength is knowing when to stop speaking, not because you have nothing to say, but because you value your peace over their comfort. Silence also disrupts unhealthy patterns. In many push-pull dynamics, one person becomes the pursuer and the other becomes the distancer. As long as you keep pursuing, the cycle stays alive. The moment you go quiet, the pattern is broken. The avoidant who's used to you always filling the gap suddenly feels that gap widen, and it's in that space where missing you begins. Silence invites curiosity. They start to wonder what you're thinking, what you're doing, and why you're not chasing anymore. That curiosity can lead to reflection, and reflection can lead to change. For you, silence is also an act of self-respect. It allows you to step back and see the relationship more clearly without the fog of constant emotional engagement. It gives you a chance to assess whether this person is capable of meeting you where you are, or whether you've been carrying the connection alone. And if they don't come forward, the silence still serves you because it becomes the boundary that protects you from further disappointment. Many people fear silence because they equate it with loss or abandonment. But when you reframe it, you see that silence is a tool, a strategic pause that shifts the energy and forces both people to confront the reality of the situation. For the avoidant, it shows that your presence isn't guaranteed. For you, it reinforces that you're strong enough to stand on your own. In the end, silence isn't a void, it's a statement. It says, I am here, I am whole, and I do not need to shout to be heard. When you understand this, you stop seeing silence as the absence of power and start seeing it for what it truly is. The most powerful move you can make. Stop chasing, start attracting. Here's how. In relationships, especially with someone who has avoidant tendencies, the natural impulse when they pull away is to chase. You want answers, reassurance and connection, so you try harder, sending more messages, initiating more conversations, making more effort to bridge the emotional gap. But with avoidance, chasing only reinforces their instinct to retreat. The more you run after them, the more they feel suffocated. The truth is, attraction isn't built through pursuit. It's built through presence, self-respect, and space. When you stop chasing, you shift the dynamic completely, creating the conditions where they can actually feel drawn back towards you. Attracting instead of chasing starts with a mindset shift. You stop asking, how can I get them to give me more? And start asking, how can I give myself more? This isn't about ignoring them or playing hard to get. It's about genuinely focusing on your own growth, joy, and well-being. When you invest in yourself, you naturally radiate a confidence and self-assuredness that others find magnetic. Avoidants, in particular, respond to this because it removes the pressure. They no longer feel like you're demanding closeness they're not ready for. Instead, they see you living fully, which makes them curious and more willing to approach on their own terms. Chasing is rooted in fear, the fear of losing them, the fear of not being enough, the fear that if you stop, they'll forget you. But attraction is rooted in trust, the trust that you are enough as you are, and that the right person will value and pursue you without being forced. When you stop chasing, you send a powerful message. I'm here because I choose to be, not because I'm desperate to be chosen. That subtle shift changes how they see you and how you see yourself. For the avoidant, this change can be surprising. They're used to the dynamic where you do the emotional heavy lifting. When you step back, they're left to feel the absence of your effort, and that absence is what creates space for them to step forward. It's not about manipulating them into missing you. It's about giving them room to realize your value without constant reminders. For you, the benefits are even greater. You reclaim your time, energy, and emotional clarity. You start engaging with life in ways that make you feel fulfilled, whether they're involved or not. You stop living in reaction to their behavior and start living in alignment with your own needs and values. This shift not only changes the dynamic with them, but also sets a higher standard for every relationship you have in the future. When you stop chasing and start attracting, you take the focus off convincing someone to stay and put it back where it belongs, on creating a life and energy so vibrant that the right people naturally want to be part of it. And in that space, you discover the most liberating truth of all: you never needed to chase anyone to be worthy of love. When you say nothing, they hear everything. In relationships with avoidant partners, words often lose their power. You can explain your feelings, make your needs clear, and repeat yourself a dozen times, yet it feels like nothing changes. Avoidants tend to shut down when faced with emotional intensity, so your words might be met with silence, defensiveness, or withdrawal. That's why choosing not to speak can sometimes communicate far more than anything you could say. When you stop explaining, justifying, and stop chasing, the absence of your voice becomes louder than any argument or plea. Silence creates contrast. When you've been consistently vocal about your needs and feelings, your sudden quiet becomes noticeable. It shifts the dynamic and forces the avoidant to notice the change. That change signals that something is different. Maybe you're no longer willing to carry the emotional weight, or maybe you've decided to prioritize your own peace. Either way, the absence of noise invites them to pay attention in a way your words never could. The message is clear: your energy is no longer on tap for someone to take for granted. When you say nothing, you also take control of the pace of the relationship. Instead of reacting instantly to every pull back or mixed signal, you give yourself time to reflect and decide whether engaging is even worth it. That pause protects you from saying things in frustration that you might regret later. It gives you space to assess whether the connection aligns your values with an emotional needs. By not speaking, you shift from reacting to responding. And sometimes, your best response is to simply stay quiet. For the avoidant, your silence can be disarming. They're accustomed to the dynamic where you're the one keeping the connection alive through conversation and effort. When that stops, they're faced with the reality that without your voice, without your presence filling the gaps, the relationship feels emptier. They may not admit it right away, but the quiet forces them to confront what life would feel like without you in it. That's when your absence starts to speak volumes. The key is that your silence must come from strength, not from fear or passive aggression. If it's rooted in bitterness, it becomes a weapon. If it's rooted in self-respect, it becomes a boundary. You're not withholding communication to punish them. You're simply not willing to keep pouring energy into a one-sided exchange. This distinction matters because it keeps your silence aligned with self-worth, not control. Ultimately, when you say nothing, they hear the most important message of all. You are no longer available for a relationship that costs you your peace. And whether they step up to close that gap or allow the silence to grow, you've made your statement. You've chosen yourself. That choice resonates louder than any speech you could give, and in the quiet, the truth becomes impossible to ignore. If you want them to respect you, stop over-explaining. One of the most common mistakes people make in relationships, especially with someone who has avoidant tendencies, is believing that if they just explain their feelings well enough, the other person will understand and change. You tell your side of the story in every possible way, repeating yourself, clarifying your intentions, and trying to make them get it. But over-explaining doesn't inspire respect. It often does the opposite. It communicates that you're seeking approval, that you're trying to convince them of your worth, and that their opinion holds more power over you than your own self-belief. Avoidants, in particular, can feel overwhelmed or pressured by constant explanations. They hear your repeated points not as care, but as emotional intensity they need to step back from. Instead of drawing them closer, over-explaining can push them further away, creating the very distance you're trying to close. Respect is built when you communicate clearly once and then allow your actions to back up your words. When you stop over-explaining, you send the message that your boundaries and feelings stand on their own. They don't need constant justification to be valid. Not over-explaining also shifts the power dynamic in subtle but important ways. When you state your needs or limits once and let them stand, you demonstrate confidence and self-assurance. You show that you believe in your own perspective without needing someone else to validate it. This creates a sense of quiet strength, and that's something people, avoidant or not, tend to respect. The more you try to persuade someone to see things your way, the more you give them the upper hand in deciding whether your feelings are legitimate. The less you do that, the more they recognize you as an equal who knows their own value. For you, stopping the habit of over-explaining is freeing. It saves you from the frustration of feeling unheard after pouring out your heart. It preserves your emotional energy, allowing you to invest it in areas of your life where it will be met with understanding and appreciation. It also protects your self-worth from being tied to someone else's willingness to agree with you. For the avoidant, this change can be striking. They're used to you doing the emotional labor of bridging the gap through constant communication. When you stop, it forces them to do their own reflection. They may start paying closer attention to your words the first time you say them because they realize you won't be repeating yourself endlessly. This can actually improve communication because your points carry more weight when they're not buried under repetition. Ultimately, if you want someone to respect you, especially someone with avoidant tendencies, you have to show that you respect yourself first. That means setting boundaries, speaking your truth once, and then letting your actions do the rest. When you stop over-explaining, you stop giving away your power. And in relationships, that quiet, steady self-respect speaks louder than any argument you could ever make.